Okay, so hello, Siobhain Crosbie, aka Vonnie, for Therapists in Conversation. And it's so good of you to actually take some time to talk to me today. And I'd just like to know a little bit more about what you do. And I'm sure everyone who watches Therapists in Conversations monthly discussion panel would also know because you're a good regular there. So, Vonnie, how did this
Yes.
all start?
Oh, thank you, Leslie. I think it was a little bit preordained once upon a time and embedded in my unconscious, but without actually appreciating any of that. I became a counsellor in 2003. I qualified on the basis of actually falling pregnant, having my son, having lots of physical problems during the actual birth itself, meeting a therapist because my GP felt very bad about letting me down. So sent me a therapist to make me feel better. And I remember sitting there thinking, I could do what she does. She comes round, she has a nice cup of tea, she seems quite nice, and off she drops. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And so when I started studying in Waltham Forest College, and I did studying from, it was a 5-year course squeezed into 4, because I did 2 courses in one go. The diploma changed the year I left, so I had a 1-year diploma because the previous course was incorporated within the diploma the next year. I personally didn't agree with that because it meant students started seeing clients a year earlier, if you like. Whereas I always felt that it was best to leave it to the very last year. And I fell in love with understanding self-awareness. It was the first time I walked into a course, the very first basic course, where it was almost like somebody just went and turned a key in my mind, and I'd never understood anything about psychology. I come from a generation and a background where studying it, or psychology wasn't even a course subject in my school. So I blindly went through life, and I genuinely know that everything I went through caused me to react in ways that were not good for me. That I had absolutely no understanding of why, how. I didn't even stop to think about it. I think everything that I did, everything I felt was shoved into little boxes, and I just carried on making, unfortunately, mess after mess after mess after mess, and mistake after mistake after mistake, without understanding anything as to what was drawing me to where or why I was doing it or where it all came from. I had no knowledge whatsoever. The surprising thing for me was 6 years after qualifying, a schoolwork one of mine was presented to me from my mum's attic, and I opened it up and it blew me away because my social work studies were based on the effects of sexual, physical, and emotional trauma. And for a 15-year-old, what I wrote, realistically, social services should have been called in, because you wouldn't know what I knew. You shouldn't. A 15-year-old just shouldn't have known what I knew. And I really didn't understand what I knew. I wrote from a place of my heart and soul, but I didn't understand what I was writing. Whereas if anybody that had an ounce of psychology had picked up that 15-year-old's book and saw what I was writing, they would have absolutely have been taken action. They wouldn't have known what action to take. Was nothing to do with my father, which is a very common thing to think. But in essence, I had an amazing father who died very young. Unfortunately for me, that added to my trauma 3 years after I wrote that book. So I somehow believe it was my fate to end up here, considering what I was writing back then and not appreciating anything about anything. And I found the power of self-awareness. It shocked me in a way that is actually quite difficult to explain, because it was such a revelation for me to understand that there are different parts of us. There was our unconscious, our semi-conscious, and that most trauma, it has to play out in some way, shape, or form.
I think that the situation in the most basic, simple sense is a penny dropping moment.
Yeah.
It's like the light just comes on and the machine opens up and it's like, yes, it's here. that's the reason. But isn't it so amazing that almost everybody that you meet who is a therapist, a healer, either complementary or natural health, basic traditional medicine, they all come from a space of, I know how that works because that was me.
Yeah.
I can relate, I can empathize, I can, I say empathize, but I know that we can't actually feel or what the other person is feeling per se, but we can understand the situations and how their behavior might react that way because it happened to us or someone that we know. And we recognize that people write scripts about it all the time. This pain comes from somewhere. It doesn't just drop out of the sky for no reason. And therefore, people like us don't drop out of the sky for no reason.
Yeah.
There's always a key for every lock to a certain extent. And that was the basis of Therapists in Conversation, was bringing us all together. So I'm so glad to have you on board, particularly because your view is very sympathetic to complementary issues as well as the more clinical side. And I think it's very important for people to understand, and for us too, that when it comes to therapy, depending on what your needs are, the therapists themselves should be able to and be brave enough to say, do you know what? I think you need someone more clinical than I am. And I just know a person who can. And I think it's very important that we have that relationship. But we can all go back and find something in our past that was a little flick of a switch that turns you on to the idea that I can do that. I can help. And that's a drug almost in itself, isn't it?
It was for me, because if my understanding was, if I could understand that self-awareness and I could learn to change, oh my God, what I could do for other people, helping them understand themselves. And I do agree, it is like a drug, because the power of your recognition and the impact it can have on people. And I notice it even as I'm saying it to you, it makes me feel so happy, which is automatically reflected in my face, because I do understand the power of it. And it's the most incredible part of who we are as a human being, to know that you do have the opportunity to be self-aware. And when you understand that power and you use it for yourself as well as others in a relationship, the impact is incredible. I find it actually hard to find a word in the English dictionary that's actually big enough to be able to say how mind-blowing it is, how powerful it is. To me, it's a little bit like magic, and that magic plays out beautifully. And you're right, when you have those other framing of psychology, whether or not it's physical, as in Reiki or massage, when you think of all those holistic therapies, we're treating the whole body. And no matter what happens up here, it will affect the rest of us. No matter what happens in the body, it affects the mind. So all of our different ways of coming together and sharing information is, and to know the ladies that are involved with the therapy conversations, they know their stuff. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. They're very proud, they're very passionate, they love what they do. And that's 2/3 of anything that anybody does. When you love what you do and you see the power for somebody else, then it's a joy. You know, this is not something I do for money, it's my vocation, it's heartfelt. Yeah. And I get that from all the ladies that we work with. It feels like it comes from their heart and soul.
It does. And I think also that the main thread that runs through everything, the river that runs through it, is energy. It's all about the energy and how we actually release it or hold it or allow it to be blocked, or don't even understand that we're blocking it. And it's true, the mind actually shows, the body is the physical representation of what's going on in the mind and in the energy centers of the body, which is why Chinese medicine has got all these meridians and things, and they talk about flow all the time. But your career has flowed in an amazing way, because you've actually made a tributary of accreditation now, haven't you?
Yes, I mean, that was started on the back of having colon cancer in 2018, combined with meeting my managing director, David Sleet, who's a brilliant coach. He's probably the most in-depth psychological coach I've ever known, which is why we work so well together. So he presented a model to me that he'd been working on, and I'd been practicing that model without realizing that there was a label that had been created for that model. And really, it was a bit like Irvin D. Yollem's version of Soul to Soul. When we connect to the depth of somebody in front of us, the power of that connection is so immense. And what can come out of that change, that connection, is just incredibly powerful. Well, I've been doing that in my private practice as part of who I was. And then up pops David. We got talking. He shared his model with me, and I've been doing that. I didn't realize you could translate it into a business model because I'd always been doing it simply with my clients. I never considered thinking about it on a business level. So combined with cancer changes you. And I know colon cancer, and going through it with my self-awareness and getting politically involved in the therapy world all at the same time. It was like a collision of stars, all at the right time, in the right way, to say, give her time to think. She needs time off her private practice. She needs the energy to be able to get back to it. And she needs to maybe up her game and realize what she can be capable of creating for other people that are actually peers and other professionals. And on the back of that, I just sat there one day and said, there's so much unhappiness in the world of therapy. We know everything about why people aren't happy. Why not create something that actually is for peers, but is also inclusive of other professionals? So, for example, we encourage people like teachers to come on board, police officers, social workers, because when you think about it, there's often, if I think about the topic of eating disorders, often there's more than the therapist, and at times there's definitely more than the therapist actually required to work with that person. If that person has actually gotten physically ill on the basis of an eating disorder, bringing other people into it is really, really important to be able to acknowledge that it's basically that your ego is not there to look after that client on your own, that you need to recognize that sometimes there are times when other people are required in a certain situation, whether or not that's at risk, social workers, that's the first thing that my brain goes to. Having a collection of individuals that we're all tied to at some point in our career, or I can certainly say I have, is a very useful thing to have as a membership, because it means that they get psychological support through our 2-hour free supervision as part of their membership, and they can pick who they want. But also, if I need support from a social worker and I don't know absolutely everything about social work, because that's not my forte, I can call on one of those people and I can ask them for guidance if I need that guidance. So for me, having that connectivity between other disciplines and being able to work together is representative of the connection with a client, being able to work together. So it all stems from the ethos of working with clients, every bit of it.
It's all about relationship. It's about the relationship, not just between you and the client, but understanding what the client needs beyond what you can give. So therefore, building a body, a professional body, if we take that metaphor, the body has so many different limbs, so many different facets, so many different systems within it, but they all work in harmony and concert to actually make the thing work, to make it healthy. And I think it's also very good now, particularly, to concentrate on what less of what makes us unhappy and more about how we can actually make things better, happier, because happy is different to everybody. Happy
Yes.
is a long road that has many little cul-de-sacs.
It is.
You know?
It's a state of mind.
Yeah.
And it's really important to acknowledge that life is fluid, you know.
And it's learning that it's not outside of us. It's not
Yes.
in a Chanel bag or a selfie or a pair of eyebrows that you can see from the moon. It's actually got to do with this state of mind of being in harmony and balance. And I think that's what psychology is about. You know, it's speaking of the soul, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's all got to do with, you speak of the soul, you speak of balance, attachment, and actual connection to what everything else that's around you. And that's the holistic situation. So
and that's exactly why APA, I am very proud of APA, and I have no doubt that we'll go far. We're in the process of applying for the PSA. Due to COVID, it's going to take us a lot longer to get the actual hallmark of their approval on our website, but we are on the PSA website as filing with intent. And that in essence means that they're going to process it.
So just for me and for other viewers, PSA is standing for?
It's the Professional Standards Association.
Right.
So it's what every organisation out there has to go through, including paying out an extortionate amount of money. So I might throw that in there. I think it's important to acknowledge this is not a £1,000 accreditation mark, and under any circumstances, £23,000 to acquire your accreditation. And you have to go through to make sure that every single process follows their guidelines. They have 13, but they have 38 sub-parts of that. Now, APA works with every single one of those already. So it's very much making sure that our complaint system works appropriately, which is one of the biggest things that are the difficulties with the current systems, complaint systems, and making sure that we're doing exactly what we're supposed to do, which is work. From my perspective, we're working with the ethos of therapy. So we're using everything about therapy to take it outside of the room and make it apply to everybody around us, which is supporting, helping, advising, growing, learning, developing, and putting all that together and making it part of the accreditation itself. So I hope as we go further that more things will come out of it, more work will be created for therapists, and I have no doubt we're going to achieve this. But it does take a huge amount of work and effort. And sometimes I sit there, Leslie, and I think, oh, what have you done? I say to myself, well, you know what? Sometimes it takes a crazy person to change the world. And if it takes you a little bit of that, you know what? Work with it, live with it, because that's what does change the world. Somebody doing something different.
Yeah, it only takes one molecule to change the rate of the chain.
Absolutely.
It really does.
Absolutely.
You know,
so I do have to keep reminding myself that as much as it's really hard work, that people are beginning to benefit out of it already. You know, they can earn money from their membership. There's so many opportunities for them to earn passive income, and that came from cancer, because I went from fantastic income with my practice to almost a year of no income, which after a long period of time, that was really, really difficult to go through. At least us having a benevolent fund, being able to help people out. We've done things differently to anybody else out there, with the whole aim of the therapist and the social worker or the teacher or whoever wants to be part of the membership, but it's about them being self-aware. So they do have a verbal assessment, and that verbal assessment tells us a huge amount about the individual. I'm not party to that because it's a conflict of interest, but we do have a team that actually do that. And they're people that have already gone through that process, so they know what the process is, but they get paid for that. So some people have actually already been paid back their own membership fee by working on the assessments on the further generation of people coming into the organisation. And that was the idea, to give people different strings to their bow, if you like, and different opportunities to grow, develop, and not be financially restricted based on the choices that they've made to be a therapist.
And it's true, particularly at the moment, the issue with not being paid, it's across the board now, not just therapists, but just about everybody is being furloughed or actually being made redundant. So there's a lot of need for help in different areas. There's a lot of different stressors and triggers that are going on. And we know what it's like to have the stressor and trigger of cancer coming up there. But it's still losing your job or not knowing where the next rent pay is coming from is something that will cause illnesses, will cause defects, will cause stress that will make itself known in many varied ways. So it's always good to know that there's someone somewhere that you can talk to that will actually be there for you and will be able to guide you to the right person closer to you, perhaps. So, do you also have a directory with you?
Yes, which is one of our biggest aims, because most directories are based on academia, whereas our directory is based on the academic side, but also that verbal assessment. So it means that every single person that goes to our directory and picks to work with somebody, I can stake my own reputation, which is a huge thing for me to do, because I've been working in this field for a long time. But it's staking my reputation on knowing that whatever person they pick, they will get somebody that is self-aware. And for me, above all else in the therapy world, it's about your own relationship with your own power in your room and how you work with that power in relation to the person in front of you. And for me, that's huge. That really is huge.
And you're still actually working one-to-one with clients, yes?
I am. I was fortunate because I rarely advertise my private practice because I don't have to anymore. I'm in a very fortunate position like that. So you'll never see APS advertised, but most of my clients came over to the computer initially. I've gone back to face now because my room is large enough and I put in multiple different boundaries. All my clients are working with those boundaries. So at the moment, I'm doing 3 different lots of appointments, and they're all based on different situations and the context of different people. So and their own occupations. So I'm working on Zoom, I'm working face to face, and I'm working on the phone. So it's all shifted from complete face to face to a mismatch of me making sure that I'm right next to everybody's name, because they're probably ones that would have been in front of me before, but for whatever reason, where they might work in a hospital. And if they work in a hospital, they're on Zoom. So even for me, it's been a massive adaptation to work with the different boundaries, the awareness of who's who, what they're doing, what their occupation is, if they're working from home, if they're mixing, and have to manage all these boundaries, including even if you meet somebody for the first time face to face. I used to respond to them putting their hand out. Now I'm having to, but it's a shift and change for everybody. And I acknowledge that. I do actually say out loud, normally this wouldn't be the way that I'd be managing it, but due to the circumstance, da, 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 da. Thankfully, I am ridiculously lucky to have the client work that I actually do. I really, really am. And I think a good part of that is my teaching. I've had so much incredible teaching behind me. So I kind of owe what I do a huge amount to supervision. And the supervisor that I had alongside me for over 13 years, Leslie, he taught me absolutely everything he knew. So it's like a ripple impact, isn't it? The teacher guides the student and the student becomes the teacher, and it goes on. And I feel like I owe so much to Adrian Pennington, who unfortunately died of cancer a couple of years ago. And he was my inspiration and he was my guide. And I saw him once a week, no matter what clients I had, and no matter how many clients I had an hour with him every single week. And looking back, don't ask me how I financially did it all. I actually don't know, but somehow I did do it. And I think that says something about my passion, my desire, and the importance for me to be the best I could with clients in front of me. He was my guide. So I just think supervision, especially for people that are becoming newly qualified therapists, it's very easy to sit there and think, well, I've only got one client this week, so I'll only do half an hour supervision. Supervision is about a relationship in itself, in my opinion. And it's reflective of how we work with that professional as to how we work within our room. For me, gaining as much education and understanding, and if you like, an increased knowledge of anything that came up, because one client in half an hour can be nothing when you're newly trained, because obviously it depends on what you've done before being a therapist, but most therapists coming into it, well, they've not done therapy before. So having that guidance, if I could drum it home to every single therapist, find a brilliant supervisor, let them guide you week by week, break your neck somehow to make sure you've got the money, because that's what leads to you being better for your clients. And the better you are for your clients, the more that they succeed in what they need to do, the more they refer you on, and the more you end up with people coming to you. So it's not just about you learning, it's about how the impact of that learning ripples out and what it does for your own reputation.
It's walking your talk.
Sorry?
It's walking your talk.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We all know that, you know, we're human too.
Yes.
And we have issues, we have days when it's not working. There are different stressors that happen. And you cannot be totally professional all the time.
Because it's about understanding what totally professional even means, doesn't it?
Yes. Because with some people are more empathetically emotional with their clients. Some people are, no, you have the emotion and I keep the professional barrier here. And it depends, because it's horses for courses. You have this idea, and this is why some people will prefer one rather than another. But if they don't know that the one that will suit them is out there, they're going to go with the one that they don't like and say, nah, I didn't like it, didn't work for me, and not going to do it again.
Yes.
And then just sit and mither in their trouble. So what would you say to someone in that situation? How would you get them to come back and try again?
If it was a client of my own, which isn't often happening, thank God, I would ask them to tell me what the difficulties it is that they're actually feeling in the room and talk it through. But I also think it's okay to acknowledge if that person wasn't comfortable for whatever reason, then I would give them recommendations as to who I think that they could go to. But I would also, because this is the way that I work, I spend 15-20 minutes on the phone to every single client before they step foot in my door and have to pay me anything. And that's my way of making sure that they feel as comfortable as they possibly can. Now, I obviously do something right, Leslie, because 99.9% of the time I have that call and they do want to come in. But I think a lot of it comes from the place of the fact that I do care. I can't do what I do as a human being without actually caring.
It shows the time, giving time to go over something, that if you just posted it to them or emailed it to them, and the question might not be written in a way that they will understand, or they don't quite get what's going on. Sometimes they want to know where you want them to go.
Yes.
And it needs to be spoken about on occasions, because there can be misunderstandings that go on just in the written word, as we know with texting, which is one of the worst things that could happen sometimes. Especially if you leave your capitals on, people think you're shouting at them.
Yes.
So it's one of those things that, giving that, particularly now with the having to do it long distance for most of the time for the last few months, consent forms and informed consent really has got down to dotting the T's and crossing the I's.
Yeah.
And I mean that way, dotting the T's and crossing the I's, because your I's are crossed by the time you finish making up these consent forms and trying to get everything on the paper. But you can't do that, because there's always something, because people are individuals.
Yeah.
So taking that time to actually speak to them beforehand, maybe it's a 15-20 minute phone call, or a 15-20 minute Skype or Zoom call, or other things are available to do that on.
It's important.
It shows that you are supporting, that you're not just going to be, oh, well, she sees like X amount of people every day and then gets X amount of money for it, and then she goes away and doesn't worry about it. You know, we all have things to do for our clients above and beyond and in between seeing them.
And I've always been prepared to do that above and beyond when it's been required. So I have been very comfortable in the past, and all with clients' permissions. But I've been very comfortable at attending mental health meetings with them. I've been very comfortable at going to police stations with them. I've been very comfortable at going to colleges and saying, this is the situation, you're a support network for this individual, it's really important that you're aware of what's going on. All of that is with whoever's consent. I will never do anything without their consent in any way, shape or form. But I do think if you can't show that side of yourself, because to me that is the professional side, it's about making sure that it's not just about the appointments. There are things that come up that you as a therapist know that you can help that person with. And if you don't use that, I don't know whether or not being raised Catholic has anything to do with the way I am, because I'm a lapsed Catholic, but it did teach me about irrational guilt. I had irrational guilt for years and years and years. What it's turned into now is I don't have irrational guilt, but I hate the feeling of guilt so much that I will do everything in my power to avoid feeling unnecessary righteous guilt. And in some way, shape or form, it means that I know I'm comfortable at doing what is right for somebody else, because they deserve that. The courage that they find to come into a therapist that they don't know.
We all deserve that little extra piece of help.
Absolutely.
And in doing things.
It's not often that I think we see the word professional as somebody that is boundaried, and sometimes there's an almost inhuman part in that boundary, but actually it doesn't have to be like that. You can be boundaried and a human being.
Yeah.
And for me, the two work together, because one is your own personal boundaries, one is the boundary with the client in front of you. And when you work that way out of your life or out of your therapeutic room and take it into your private personal life, all the things that you learn, self-awareness doesn't just, it's not a hat you take on and off. It's something I consciously use all the time, to the point where it's so ingrained, I don't have to sit there anymore and think, right, what do I feel? I can instantly go, I'm feeling this, what's that about? I know what that's about, I'm not going to react like that, don't need to do this, da 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 da. That little, it's like little pinpoints in my brain that are firing off to the point where I can smile at myself and say, thank God for my self-awareness. You know? So it is powerful, and I believe in it. And if everybody was taught it, the world would be a better place.
So Vonnie, if someone was going to get in touch with you, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, they would get in touch with me through www.ayanay.co.uk, pronounced ANA.co.uk. They can also look for me anywhere on Google. All you have to do is put my name in, Siobhain Crosbie, or as you pointed out, my alias is Vonnie Crosbie. I'm all over Google, and our telephone number is 0208 556 4984. There are PAs there. They will pick up the message. You can get in touch with me in multiple different ways. I'm everywhere.
Well, Vonnie, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time in the room.
And Leslie, thank you very much for allowing me to share a little bit about APA, who I am, and thank you very much for involving me with the ladies in conversation. It's a great group of people, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Our pleasure. See you soon.